A blessed day to you. Thanks for checking me out. Uh, my name is Nigel Daring. I am the originator of the philosophy of Darinism or Darinism. It's a philosophy that breaks down Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and it correlates it to my analysis of existence. And so it's basically saying, this philosophy is saying that what's presented in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is real. It reflects our reality, it reflects reality, and by understanding it, we can come to understand our world and and perhaps even change our world. You can check out my book. I really break down my thought processes in my book, Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, which you're seeing there in the background. It's available on Amazon.com. You can type in the name of the book, or you can type in my name, and you'll see 16 books come up, and you can pick that particular book, Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, or one of the or one of the others if you feel like. Um, So yeah, so that's that. I hope you check out the 10 previous videos that I did, and in terms of breaking down Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, and and so that will serve as some great background for seeing where I'm going with this video and other videos. All right, now today I'm going to take on self and world. Before that, I want to review what we time. Now, last time we spoke about insecurity and the self-consciousness that comes out of that. Um, and we said that in terms of dealing with flesh, man, man insecurity is a feature of spirit. We said there are two ways that we can approach this. Man's insecurity as a feature of spirit that becomes reflected in his body, because man's body is a reflection of his spirit, right? So Adam and Eve developed this insecurity upon the notion that the devil presented them, and which they accepted because they were actually prone to accepting it. They accepted it, they became insecure because they hated their current state of being, trying to be something else. And so their insecurity becomes reflected in their body. So when they're reaching out to their physical form, which is a tree of knowledge and good, tree of knowledge of good and evil, to reach it to get completeness, what it's actually doing is reflecting their state of their psychological state, their spiritual state. Okay, so we can so they want to use it as this tool to achieve something, and while they're obsessed with that goal, it's this tool that they want to use is actually reflecting their spiritual state. So we can look at self-consciousness and insecurity as a feature of spirit reflected in flesh. Also, we can look at self-consciousness and insecurity as a condition by which that result that's integral to the whole idea of checking out flesh, of to the whole idea of focusing on flesh. Adam and Eve are focusing on flesh to achieve something great. They want to focus on it to use it to achieve something great, and the focus on it itself constitutes a level of self-consciousness. You're focusing on your body. That's self-consciousness. Now, checking out flesh, that focus on flesh is attendant to the notion of finding fault with it. Because if you're focused on it, you're going to find fault with it, and you're going to try to want to improve it. Now, the other thing is that you're compelled to look upon it once you're insecure in spirit, because your body is reflecting your spirit. So the insecurity and shame that you're feeling in spirit is going to be reflected in flesh, and that translates to you actually looking at your body and finding fault with it. Now, also, once you start finding fault with who you are, or with your body, you're also going to want to try to improve it. And that explains why throughout history you find people trying to change their bodies, right? Because of the insecurity that they have in spirit. All right, so the insecurity in spirit is translated to flesh. Um, it's reflected in flesh. It's translated as part of the effort to focus on flesh to achieve something great. And once you're focused on flesh, once you're checking it out, you're going to find fault with it. Once you're insecure in yourself, you're in a state of saying there's something wrong. Your body's in that state spiritually. You're in that state, so your body's in that state, and so you're finding fault with your body, which is a part of your identity, and you want to improve it. Also now, uh, checking out flesh results in the realization of an obsession with its desires. You become obsessed with the physical form because you're checking it out. So you've determined flesh to be your reality, right? As what's defining you. So you become obsessed with its desires, and it's because its desires are you, a part of a you, and you become obsessed with that. You also become obsessed with its utility, the utility of flesh, what flesh can be used for, the potential of it. All right. Now, also we said that because we have the shame, once man develops this insecurity, he gets this shame, and this focus, of course, results in also the shame. That's another perspective on it. But because of the shame, there's a necessity for clothing. All right, and because of the focus on flesh, there's a lust after flesh, and but the idea isn't to lust after flesh proper. It isn't to become so ingrained in the lust that that's where your terminal point is. The idea is to lust after flesh, to to get it, to use it to achieve an ego. So the idea is you need clothing to sort of reduce the lust, right? To sort of cut down on it so you can use flesh to achieve the great thing that you're after, this great sense of self, this ego trip that you're on. Flesh is there for the ego trip. And so becoming obsessed with the lust of it sort of prevents one from getting to that ego. So clothing is necessary. Clothing is also necessary to increase some respect, because if you're in a state of lust, you realize that there are other people around you who are in that state. So by putting on clothing, you're sort of demanding some sort of respect for your body. All right, so that you're not focused on in terms of just flesh, because remember, you yourself realize that flesh is just for to be used for to achieve this great ego. So you don't want your flesh even being focused on by somebody else, for them to become trapped in flesh also. If they're gonna be in the state of chasing ego, then flesh also has in their mind should be used for that purpose, chasing this great ego. So you don't want your flesh focused on for just lust and sex and stuff like that, but you want it to be you want it to be focused on for something greater. So there's that necessity of clothing. Now we also said that man's relationship with himself, with himself spiritually, with his body, his relationship with himself translates to a relationship that he's going to have with the world. And now that's what we're going to take challenge here today. How man's relationship with himself translates to his relationship with the world. Now, man's mentality dealing with the world, what happens is there becomes a loss of complacency. There's a loss of complacency, right? Why is that? Because he's not complacency. He's not complacent in himself, so he can't be complacent in nature. This is dealing with himself is the reference to dealing with nature. He is not. And what is his natural self? His natural self is nature. His natural self is a part of God, is a reflection of God. And he's not complacent with his natural self, that means he's not complacent with nature within himself. So he's not complacent with nature outside of himself. All right? Now, that loss of complacency in nature means that he's going to look at nature and think, nature is inadequate. Just like how he's feeling within himself. He's feeling inadequate in himself. He's thinking nature itself is inadequate. He loses trust. He loses trust within himself, which in effect translates to him losing trust in nature. He loses trust in God because of this disconnect from God. He's not a part of God anymore. Right? Intellectually, he's disassociated himself from God, and also he's disassociated from God because in response, God cut him off from the tree of life. So he's disconnected from nature, and he's lost his complacency in nature, and he's lost his trust in himself and in nature, within himself, and in God who is within him, and so he loses trust in nature itself. So now he has to start realizing that, you know what, he's not sure that he's going to have food. Right? He's not. He has to feel like he has to provide for himself because he's living in a state of lack of trust, of that nature is inadequate. So he has to assure the adequacy that he needs. He has to assure it himself. So he has to get into this intense labor. This is something that God promised him, that he would get into the state of having to work, by the sweat of his brow, he's going to eat bread because he's lost that complacency in nature. He's lost that sense that nature is adequate because he feels inadequate to himself. So now he has to go out in nature and try to make sure he has food. He can't just do what God told him to do in the beginning, which was to be at peace, just go eat of the fruits of the garden and the trees, because nature is going to provide. God is going to provide. He lost that sense of comfort, and so now he's feeling that he has to provide. He's responsible for himself. Remember, he's his own God now. So now he has to think that, he has to worry about devouring nature, to making sure that he gets food, because he doesn't trust it anymore. He's not at peace within himself, and he's not at peace with nature. He doesn't feel that nature is going to provide for him, that he's just going to walk out there and the fruits are going to be there, and all his needs are going to be there. So now he has to provide that stuff all for himself. So that explains a lot of the controlling that man does when it comes to nature, the regulation, where he's trying to regulate nature to sustain his needs, because he's developed an insecurity in dealing with nature. All right. Now, the other thing to realize, from man making himself flesh, he becomes flesh and he desires flesh. So the animals which were made for him, for his companionship, he's looking at them with a different state of mind. He is flesh. And so that's his state of being. So he desires them for food because he desires flesh. He's flesh. He desired his own flesh. So now, and that becomes a state for him desiring flesh outside. He eats off his own flesh. It's spiritually. He's eating off his own flesh for food, and that's that mentality that translates to him feeding off the animals for food. So it's flesh. He's flesh. And he desires flesh. Now, there's the other aspect to why he desires meat for food, is that he's dead. Man is dead, spiritually dead, and what he's relating to is death. He's feeding his death. So by killing animals and eating them, he's feeding his state of death, because that's how he is at a spiritual level. All right. Now the other thing to realize why he can relate to slaughtering and torturing the animals for his food is because within himself he's slaughtering and torturing himself. He's torturing himself trying to be something else. And it's his agonized state of being that he's using to relate to the world in terms of devouring nature. He's slaughtering and terrorizing nature, the animals, the trees, the land, because this is his relationship with himself. The other thing to realize with man becoming uh, flesh um, is that he becomes selfish. He's in a selfish state of mind. Why? Before man sinned against God, man was a part of nature. He was in nature. He wasn't just his physical body. He was the earth. He was the planets, the stars, the animals, because he was connected to them profoundly through his connection through the tree of life. The life which is flowing through all nature was in him, it was a part of him, and he was connected to it. Also, he felt connected to it because he felt connected to God intellectually, spiritually, as a matter of respect, because he was functioning in God's periphery. He was functioning as a reflection of God. Now, with his taking on flesh and his identity being flesh, he's seeing himself only by the limitations of his body. He becomes the unit self, detached from everything else. And on top of that, God detached him from the tree of life, which is flowing through all nature and flowing through all creation. So he's not connected to everything else. So he becomes this self, this is his body, his individual self. So selfishness develops as a part of who he is. Now, the other thing to realize, it's not that he's just disconnected from nature. He despises and distrusts nature. Why? Because the shame that he feels in himself, that means he scorns himself. And his natural self is nature. It is a part of nature. And as he scorns himself, which is nature, and as he scorns God, which made him, who made him in his reflection, so it translates to scorning nature which God made. So it translates, as he scorns himself, he scorns nature. As he scorns himself, which is nature, he scorns nature which is out there in its grand form. So he despises and distrusts nature, and it's a part of man's psychology. And as part of that despise and distrust for nature, which is a contempt of the order of creation that God created, because God created the order and gave him a place in it. He didn't want it, so now he's outside of it. He's functioning outside of it, and he scorns it. Now, with that, there's a loss of, because he scorns it, he doesn't feel the need to integrate in nature. And with that, because he doesn't feel a part of it, he despises it. So that's why he can distance himself from nature, conceive of himself as man against nature, and he can devour nature. It doesn't seem in his mind that this is something that's a part of him and which he should be a part of. He loses that need to integrate himself in nature. Now, the problem is when man then distances himself from nature and its rhythms and its systems and doesn't integrate within it, he develops a scorn. That scorn becomes a mindset which he feeds into the world that he creates. That feeling of scorn, that scorn of nature, the scorn, and that scorn of reality, and that's part of his world. It becomes um, fundamental to his world. So that those feelings of superiority are essential to man's sense of to man's world, or they come a part of it. Is existence that's divorced from nature, feelings of superiority, of being better than, because in himself, the self that he has, he feels that he can be better than it that God made. He has to be better than it. So that scorn that he has, it becomes a part of his world. It's a part of how he approaches existence. Now, that scorn ends up victimizing his fellow man, right? Because it's an approach. This is how he approaches the world. Where in the original state of mankind, God introduces another human being as an equal, as a as a companion. But now with man in his evil state of mind, fellow humans can be scorned. Because the man looks at them and think that he's better than. So that whole idea that he's better than, and that whole idea that he's superior to some state, his natural state, translates to his relationship with his fellow man, and that's what, and also his woman. That lack of trust, that idea that he must victimize the other to assure his selfish sense of identity, that idea that he's better than the other, that translates to even his woman, right? And remember, woman was naturally made out of him, but he's not with his disconnect, with his mindset of selfishness. He's not seeing that anymore. He's not seeing her as a part of him, as his wife that he should be united with. Woman end up enjoying a lower socioeconomic, political status or in the world that man creates. His fellow mankind, humankind, is victimized by his mentality. Now, we must realize there are two things that victimize his nature and the world around him, around man. His ego and his fear. Remember, along with the ego comes the fear. When Adam Adam and Eve decided to accept God's, the devil's idea, this was an ego. They're on an ego trip. But then there's fear involved, because when God called out to Adam, Adam was saying, I was naked and afraid. The fear came after with the ego. The fear comes with sin, because why must there be fear now? Because man is defined by his flesh. The ego is predicated upon his flesh, using his flesh. So he has to be fearful of it. And the fear becomes a mentality also by which he's approaching nature, because he's worried that nature won't provide for him anymore. He's disconnected from nature. He's in a selfish state of mind. He's looking at nature as this other. That won't care for him. He's disconnected from God. God won't care for him anymore. So he's on his own, and plus he wants to be his own God. Now that's the ego. So he wants to be his own God. So that's the ego that allows him to divorce himself from reality. And then there's a fear also that allows him to want to regulate nature and to control it, and to develop his own world separate and apart from the world around him, because he fears the world around him. When he's naturally created, he's naturally supposed to be a part of the world around him. But with the fear, which comes off of the ego, which comes off of this selfishness, which comes off of this flesh that he's taken on for himself, he fears the world around him. He's not a part of it anymore. So now it's an antagonistic relationship. So now he fears for his life. He has to protect himself. He has to develop fortresses or societies that protects itself from nature, that attacks nature or devours nature to sustain his physical wants and his desires. And then looking at it from the standpoint of ego, he has to develop a reality divorced from nature, because for him, that's his way of becoming his own God, thinking for himself, creating his own reality, divorced from nature. The effect, this net effect, is of course that man's world becomes antagonistic and alien to the natural world. Why? Of course, because man has an antagonistic relationship with himself, has an antagonistic relationship with nature in himself, has an antagonistic relationship with God, who is fundamentally a part of his natural being. So he's enjoying this antagonistic relationship with the world out there, because he has this antagonistic relationship deep within himself. And he's alien to the world that's out there because he's alien to his own self. And it causes it's and so the world that he develops with that in that state of mind is antagonistic to nature and alien to nature. It's part of his ego. It's part of his fear complex. That he's divorced from nature. He's not. He's afraid of nature. He's afraid for his life, and he's not thinking. He's not in a complacent state anymore, where he thinks that, oh, what, you know what, nature is going to provide for me. All I just that, just had to do what I had to do in the God told me originally. Just feel comfortable in myself and go pick the fruits and the herbs of the field and stuff. Now he's worried that what if it's not there? Because he's fearing for his life. What if I don't have food to eat? So now he's gonna assure it for himself because he's afraid, and then he's on this ego trip also that says he has to think for himself. He has to assure food for himself. He has to, that's why he has to develop his own reality, irrigation systems, domestication of animals, because he's in a state of flesh also. The animals are for food, and to use them to help him, to cater to his needs, agriculture and farming and stuff. This is stuff that's unnatural, that's not necessary, but it becomes necessary in a state of evil mind and the state of evil that he has developed, the state of evil that he's subjected himself to. Okay, I just want to close out by reading this summary that I have in one of the sections of the book. So let's just read it and we'll close out with that. When Adam and Eve first eat of the forbidden tree, their eyes opened to a self-consciousness they never envisioned in their innocence. Their emotional insecurity effectively defines the spiritual death. That self-conscious and insecure mindset puts man at odds with himself, his fellows, and nature. Man views himself as inadequate, experiencing discomfort within and with his body. He also knows intense lust. Cloaking his flesh hides incompleteness and prevents direct exposure of the objects of sexual arousal. Clothing becomes a symbolic demand for respect of one's body. Man also makes efforts to reshape or decorate his body to achieve some ideal form. But such attempts to remove insecurity ultimately fail because it is emotional, not physical. The discomfort with related scorn man feels within himself extends to nature and his fellows. Man strives to create his own world, a sphere where he oppresses others under a superiority complex and overrules his surroundings. He, however, injures the environment around him in his scorn and utilization of it. He also creates adversarial relationships with his fellow man. Man wants to become God, but the consequences of that ambition are inhumanely disastrous. All right, well, that sort of summarizes what we've been talking about, or a good chunk of it. Um, but anyway, until next time, thanks for checking me out, and until next time, I hope you'll check out the other videos and look for and subscribe to my YouTube channel and get my book, Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, on www.amazon.com. Anyway, God bless. Next time.